Hi, everyone. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce our first invited speaker, Bonnie Weber. And if you don't know who she is, shame on you. But I'll introduce you anyway. So she's currently an emeritus professor at Edinburgh. She received her PhD from Harvard in 1978 and taught at UPenn for 20 years before joining Edinburgh in 1999. She is currently retired, but she continues to supervise student research. She is known for her work on discourse on Afro and discourse relations. She is a former president of the ACL, co-editor of Linguistic Issues in Language Technology, and co-developer of the Penn Discourse Tree Bank. And also, so I met Bonnie, I guess about 10 years ago, and she just randomly gave me really good advice. And I'm sure she's done that with many people. So with that, I give it over to Bonnie.
Okay, I'm gonna, let's see, screen share. Okay, let's see, share. Okay, and let me just, I'm still working on this. I have to get to, let's see. Sorry, I need to get into full screen. Where was full screen? Source, damn. File, show console. Sorry, I'm having trouble finding full screen. Oh, there it is. Oh, full screen old method. Okay, maybe that's good enough. Okay. Anna, you were delightful. That's why I gave you good advice, or I gave you advice. I didn't know whether it was good, but it was still stuff that we could stay in touch for 10 years afterwards. Let's see, let me see where I am, because now I've lost everybody. I have no idea whether I'm linked, whether I'm being heard.
Yes.
I am. Thank you. Okay. Because I can't even get out of full screen now. Oh dear. They keep changing these the interface, so you don't know where things are. Okay. I'll just start. I won't be taking even 40 minutes. Look, all of us have submitted papers and gotten back reviews, and we've gotten scores based on those reviews, and we've gotten decisions based on the reviews, and either all of them have surprised us or some have surprised us, but it was not a uniquely positive experience. So I don't want to say that reviewing per se is positive or reviewing per se is negative, but what I wanted to go over in this talk is what are the positive aspects of reviewing for us as both writers and reviewers, and what are the negative results such that we get insights from both of them. Now I'm going to see whether, here we go. Okay, so what I want to start with is what's not at issue about reviewing, which is that reviewing can be a very supportive form of communication between a reviewer and author. But what is at issue, where I find reviewing questionable, is that there are things that reviewing is not for or should not be for, what reviewing doesn't need to be for, and whether the insights about what reviewing is and isn't for can help us de-emphasize negative aspects of reviewing. Okay, so talking about reviewing as supportive communication, we know, because it's always pointed out to us, that there's a wealth of good advice on how reviewers should communicate with authors. So Emily Bender has a blog in which she advises reviewers to make a concerted effort to say what you like about a paper, in addition to how you think can be improved. And that's very supportive, because we do want to know that there is something that we thought was positive about the paper that got communicated to the reviewer and eventually, hopefully, to the audience. Hal Domey has a nice blog post in which he cautions reviewers about how their reviews can be supportive. So you can write less hurtful reviews by never saying you. And to remember that when reviewing is double-blind, there's a good chance that the author is a friend, because that's not eliminated that's not something that is eliminated as not being fair. So feedback should always be such as not to hurt either a current friend or a future friend. Okay, so this is good advice, and you know that it's good advice, whether you're reviewing in the role of a mentor, that is, you're supervising a student or a postdoc, or your colleague has given you a paper to read, or you're serving as a pre-reviewing mentor for students who are preparing papers for a conference or workshop. And I mentioned this as something which WinNLP does, and giving first time or second time writers a chance to get comments on their papers without it being rejected, so that they can take advantage of the comments to prepare a better paper. And it's also good review whether you're on the program committee for a conference or writing rolling reviews. So really here, the role of the reviewer is to help the author improve their writing or their presentation or even their research. And that's a really positive aspect of reviewing, but it's separate from other things that reviewing does. The reason that it's positive is it's really helping people produce papers that are hard to write. That is, it's hard for people to provide a clear statement of what they're claiming, because most of us start doing our research not quite knowing what it is that we're going to claim about the research. We do it because it's interesting and it looks like we might learn something, but it's not clear from the start what it is one might claim by virtue of doing research, or what might one claim depending on what the results are. Also, people start writing and their papers, and not only do they not know, not only do they not make a clear statement of what they're claiming, even if they do state what they're claiming, you get so involved in the writing and making sure it doesn't exceed page limits that you forget that the result, that you really should say something about how your results support your claim. And even more so, one would also like to see and be reminded that you should be showing a relationship between the performance of what you've done and the claims that you're making. It's too often that we see claims of improved performance, people saying, oh, well, I'm doing better than the baseline, I'm doing better than the state of the art, which fail to check whether what was handled correctly before is still handled correctly, or whether any changes or additions or new method that they've done is really looking at a completely separate part of the problem. The problem is that supportive advice is not the only role that reviewing is taken to play. And the same senior researchers who have given us good advice on playing the role of reviewing as supportive communication have also talked about these other roles of reviewing. And in particular, reviewing can serve as a gatekeeper. So it may be a gatekeeper for a journal or conference or workshop, because the reviews are deciding whether they think that the work is of interest to the intended audience. Or reviewing could be gatekeeping for a field as a whole, because the field should feel that what's presented in the paper advances the field in some meaningful way. So if reviewing is serving as gatekeeping, there really are limits to what reviewers should be doing, and our senior people have said things like this. So Emily Bender advises reviewers to be optimistic and do more than come up with reasons not to accept papers, because papers which people accept because they can't come up with reasons not to accept it does lead to conferences that are full of incremental work and don't really advance the field, because advances to the field are the papers which advance the field are not easy to write. Now, Annie Nenkova and Owen Rambo have also talked about reviewing as gatekeeping and what limits reviewers should have if they're playing a gatekeeper role, or think that they should be playing a gatekeeper role, which is if you're rejecting a paper or taking as a negative feature of a paper that there is prior work on the topic. Annie and Owen advise reviewers to provide evidence for this. It doesn't help, and we all know this, that we see reviews which say this has all been done before and nobody tells us where, and we haven't a clue. People may downgrade a paper because they think that a submission is outside the scope of a conference or a workshop or a journal. And Owen and Annie say, well, look at the call for papers and see whether it's included in the call for papers. Too many, in personal experience, too many people reject papers that have to do with corpora because they say, corporas have nothing to do with our field. So it's just, something that we take for granted. They also advise reviewers to consider atypical papers. It's not the standard thing, just because they may be of interest to the audience and maybe start something new. Now, we all know of papers being rejected because a reviewer disagrees with the work or its results. And I wanted to introduce you to a particular egregious case, which I just read about. And I don't think we've ever had anything this bad happen to anybody, but if this has, I'd certainly like to know. This was gatekeeping that had to do in paleontology and a challenge to what was called the out of Africa theory. So the out of Africa theory says that the lineage that humans come from arose in Africa between 13 and 7 million years ago, and that the genus within the hominid lineage arose in Africa 2.3 million years ago. And then our particular species, Homo sapiens, originated in Africa about 300,000 years ago. So that's the theory called the out of Africa theory. Now, this theory has been challenged, and the challenge comes from the fact that apes became extinct in Africa about 12 million years ago, and that the earliest direct ancestors of Homo sapiens evolved in Europe, which does have a lot of ape fossils between 12 million and 6 million years ago. So if it's the case that apes became extinct in Africa 12 million years ago, and there are all these fossils from apes in Europe 12 to 6 million years ago, maybe something else is going on. And during the Second World War, a fossilized jaw was discovered near Athens, actually in a German bunker, that was later x-rayed and found to have dental roots which shared features with those of the hominins. And the jaw was established to be around 7.25 million years old. Okay, so that's a picture of the jaw. And okay, so that's 1944. And later in 2002, a Polish paleontologist, Gerald Jelinski, who was vacationing near Trakalos, and Trakalos is relevant because this becomes known as the Trakalos footprints. He saw marks on the beach that he recognized as fossilized footprints. And this is a picture of what he saw. And he didn't do anything about it. But later in 2010, he returned to Trakalos with 2 colleagues and found that the feet that had left the tracks did indeed resemble small human feet rather than ape feet from apes. And dating revealed that the prints were made more than 6 million years ago. That is about the same time as that jaw. And at the time, Crete was a southward projecting peninsula of Europe rather than a separate article. And I read about this in an article by Tim Flannery in the New York Review of Books. And why I brought it up to you as an extreme case of reviewing as gatekeeping was that while Flannery was skeptical about finding 6 million year old human-like footprints on a Greek island, he writes, and evidently the paleoanthropological community felt similarly, for Jelinski and his colleagues had tried in vain for 6.5 years to get their results published. And according to the author of the book that Flannery was reviewing, the manuscript was repeatedly rejected by anonymous reviewers whose reasoning was often difficult to decipher. And I thought, as a good reminder for us, Flannery concluded his article by saying, in science, a discovery that leads to an unexpected direction or even to a dead end is often as productive as a lucky find. And I think that's a good rubric for this workshop. Okay, so, but let me continue. So if reviewing shouldn't serve as gatekeeping while still helping authors, are there other valid roles for reviewing? Because we know that reviewing is helpful for authors, and we should keep serving that role. Well, another role of reviewing has been to enforce resource limitations. So if we have live conferences, there are time-space limitations. We don't have time for all the papers. We don't have space for all the papers. So reviewing has been used to limit what papers get allocated time or space. I think for EMNLP, only a quarter of the papers got allocated time or space in the conference. If we look at physical journals or conference proceedings, then people say, well, there are page limitations. There's certainly physical journals which are published, and publishers have to worry about the number of physical pages that they're publishing. So there have been reviewing to limit the number of pages that need to be included in the journal. And of course, with audiences, there's limited attention. So reviewing has been used to limit the demands on audience attention by deciding for you, the audience, what's worth paying attention to. But then you could ask, is this a valid role? Is reviewing as a resource, as keeping to resource limitations, a valid role? Well, if conferences aren't live, then neither time nor space is a resource that needs to be limited. And in fact, you can think of the findings of EMNLP as a way of saying, well, this isn't, we don't need to have space limitations on what gets included. And if journal or conference proceedings are solely electronic, there's really no need to limit the number of pages or the number of papers. And if audience attention follows from what others are paying attention to, not necessarily from what's been reviewed, then attention doesn't need to be limited by reviewing either. Another role of reviewing is reviewing has been taken as a way of signaling quality. So if you look at someone's CV, often they put the acceptance rate of the conference or journal that a paper has been accepted at, because there's this belief that the lower the acceptance rate of a conference or journal, then the higher the quality of the journal. Is that a valid role? Because one might ask whether low acceptance rates counts as much as they have in the past, when we have venues like Archive, which make everything available. And what is more important to a paper is the readership, and readership as shown in citations. So what's my recommendation? And this is a bugbear of mine, which I always try to get a chance to say. My recommendation to people is to write for journals rather than just for conferences and workshops. And the reason for this, tied in with the reviewing that I've been talking about, is that reviewers for journals are really more vested in what they review, since what they reviewed, when suitably revised, will likely come back to them. So it's not this one-shot reviewing that conferences and workshops in the past have dealt with. And that follows because journal submission has a number of decisions that reviewers can make, and which editors make a decision on, because a journal submission is going to be reviewed by more than one person. So a journal submission might be accepted after minor revisions, accepted after major revisions. It may be re-reviewed after presentational revisions are made, or it may be re-reviewed after further work is done. But the main thing is that the reviewer will see it again, and therefore the reviewer is really vested in the paper. Now, I have to say before going on that the reason I'm really recommending to people that they write for journals is that it's so much easier as a reader to have one place where somebody sets out what their claims are and how they're supported by their work, rather than 7 little papers, which you're not even sure of what order the paper was written in and what you should conclude from that. So I'd really like to see more papers being submitted to journals and being written at a length where we can make sense of what the work is. Okay, now I want to question reviewing as quality control for conferences. And this is another point that I make at the drop of a hat if anybody asks. If you have a conference or a workshop, like we used to have many hundreds of years ago, where every paper is assessed by the same set of reviewers, then you can imagine that the resulting rank ordering actually does put the higher quality papers on top. And often this happens when you're looking for best paper. You have a small committee that looks at all of the papers that might be considered for best papers, and they have a sense of all the papers, and they're making the decision based on having applied the same criteria for all the papers. On the other hand, if every paper is assessed by a different set of reviewers, you've got to call into question whether one reviewer giving one paper a score of 3.3 is the same as another reviewer giving some other paper that same score. So that we often see these kinds of graphs at the beginning of conferences where they summarize the papers and the scores that they get and what the disposition of the paper was. This is the one for EMNLP this year, saying depending on the score, either it was rejected completely, and notice that even the papers really low down have some red, which is acceptance into findings, and 3, which is the score we're always told try to avoid giving to a paper. Those papers have acceptances both into just the archival findings or EMNLP itself. So I find this somewhat distressing because it assumes that all reviewers treat the scores in the same way. And you know very well that that's not the case. So this treating all reviewers as meaning the same thing by their scores is not something that is solved by the new method that is being adopted for ACL called rolling reviews, where you are supposed to be submitting papers and it being some halfway station between reviewing for a conference and reviewing for a journal, because there's a chance that the same paper will come back after it's been revised. But I was surprised to find that a new feature of the rolling reviews that's come in within the last couple of weeks is that the rolling reviews now has the same hierarchy of senior area chairs, and reviewers as the conferences are, because now everybody is, the worry is everybody is now going to submit to the November deadline for rolling reviews, which just means that the rolling reviews recapitulate standard conference reviewing, which would have started now or within another month for the conference. So I don't think rolling reviews solves the problem of treating, of really getting high quality reviews and knowing how to interpret the quality of reviews. So my conclusions here are that reviewing has a role as providing constructive feedback, and that for the roles of gatekeeping and quality control, reviewers, thousands of reviewers, because we're talking about 2,000-3,000 reviewers who might be enrolled in the process of reviewing, and they're being sent papers that have no interest, that they're not interested in, that they don't really understand. They might be better spent letting them all the papers in. I've argued this for years. Why don't we just accept all the papers and let positive citations be the mark of quality? It does mean that people will have to learn how to write useful background material, previous work sections, which actually are hard to write and which are questionable about, because people just think that the background material previous work means I have to check things off, rather than say how my own work follows from the situation in which this previous work existed. So one could really understand what they take the role of their own paper to be with respect to previous work. So I'm calling for eliminating reviewing for gatekeeping or quality control. I am pro reviewing for constructive feedback, and I am pro people learning how to understand the previous material as the groundwork for their own work. And that's it. That's me. So I am going to try to get out of this window, which I can't get out of. Oh, there I am. Okay, great. Okay, I'm finished. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have a question from the audience.
Do we have time for questions?
Yes,
Can you hear
we
me?
definitely have time for
Bonnie,
questions.
can you hear me? This is Noah Smith.
Hi, Noah.
Hi, Bonnie. I can see you on the screen, but there's no camera on me. I'm in the room in Punta Cana.
Oh, yes, I think I noticed that you were going to be in Punta Cana.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm giving a talk here later today. Anyway, great to see you. Thanks for a great talk. Great to think about these things. To your last recommendation, I think in some ways I'm really on board with this, and I think, you know, we all have too much reviewing to do, and I think you're right that it doesn't serve the purpose. It's not serving the purpose it was intended to serve, and I think a lot about how we could make it better. One of the things that we run into when we talk about, you know, these radical proposals, like just don't review, let everything in, which is kind of what happens with archive, right? Everything can go to archive.
Exactly.
So one of the things that comes up though is that all of this whole publishing system has a weird relationship with the way with people's, you know, merit reviews in academia, and not just in academia anymore. And there are places in the world where, in order to have career advancement, one has to have peer-reviewed publications at certain blessed venues. Mm-hmm. And so that I feel like the research community has been asked to carry out this responsibility of blessing papers with the star that says this went to, you know, this went through peer review, therefore it's work that's been blessed by the community. And when this person goes up for tenure or promotion, it should count in some sense. And I don't think this is a great, you know, I don't love this. I've been telling people in, you know, places like this that the academics should be rising up with pitchforks in rebellion against these systems, but obviously it's not that easy. But I'm wondering, maybe what you're proposing leads to a world where we can still have blessed papers, but the blessing happens later. So you publish your papers, you put them out there, we accept everything at the conference. The conference is mostly about schmoozing and chatting in the hallways. But which is great, by the way. It's, you know, I wish you were here. But 5 years later, after the paper appeared on archive, we issue the ACL compendium of great papers from 5 years ago. And so after the fact, when we see what actually had influence and what was cited, we bless the papers, and therefore when tenure comes, they can look at what you did 5 years ago and say, yeah, it was enough. I don't know if this is great. It's just sort of it's the natural reaction or obvious solution to that problem. I'm wondering what you're thinking about how can we continue to serve the needs of people who need career advancement while still having great conferences and being open. Thanks.
Thanks, Noah. So I have to apologize because I listened to the talk that you gave on reviewing and I thought it was brilliant. And I made lots of notes that I was going to include in this talk. And then the pressure of actually getting a talk delivered by Thursday crept up on me. So I didn't.
No worries.
So everybody should listen. Everybody should listen to Noah's talk on reviewing. But Noah's, so let me address a couple of things that Noah said. First of all, I think we brought this on ourselves because the people who are assessing young people for promotion and advancement, we're taking it from us that the number of times I wrote that this conference is as good as a journal. I'm embarrassed about the number of times I've said that. I no longer say that. I don't need to, because it's scary that now there are committees which actually think that conferences are better than journals, which to me is crazy. Okay, so that's one thing. I think we've brought it on ourselves, and I don't think we have to accept the status quo, only the status quo won't disappear as quickly as one wants. Now, with respect to your point about the papers from 5 years ago, I think we are moving to that. So we have an ad hoc committee on best papers, which is now thinking much more seriously about papers from 5 years ago and papers from 10 years ago, and recognizing the value of those papers to the field. So I'd be completely on board with the idea of let 1,000 flowers bloom. Everybody gets to see everything. If you want to take advantage, like WinNLP makes available, of other people who are willing to give you comments on their papers, great. And then we look back and see which papers really were the important ones for the field. So Noah, all your points are great, and I wish we were schmoozing together, but it may have to wait until the NACL conference in Seattle.
Okay, we have another question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Bonnie, for this wonderful talk. My name is Margot, and I hope you can hear me because I have to stretch towards
Margot,
the
I can
microphone.
hear you, but I don't know what, it's Margot what?
Margot Mieskes.
Oh, okay, and I can
University-
even spell your name, okay.
No worries. So thank you very much. I really like this talk, and I liked a lot of your ideas. I was wondering, so other communities actually do not submit actual full papers, but they submit something like an abstract, like 2 or 3 pages, where you actually provide this background material, your research question, and your idea of how to solve the research question. And then the reviewing is this constructive feedback. And then once the conference sort of happens, you have the full paper, but you don't have to have the full paper like 3 months before the conference happens. What about incorporating aspects of that into this whole idea? Because I think that would go for the constructive feedback. It would also keep a bit of quality control, but it would be more on the constructive side than on the criticizing side.
No, I think that is wonderful. When we started ACL, the reason you don't find ACL papers from before 1978 is that we didn't have papers before that time. We had conferences, but all people submitted were extended abstracts, because you didn't have to write papers in order to present your work. You wrote an extended abstract, and I think it's a wonderful idea to have the extended abstracts so that people know what you're talking about, and then making the papers available the same way people are making these videos available. The videos are nice because you get a capsule summary of what people are talking about. It takes a little longer to go through than an extended abstract, but then you've got the whole paper. And if we do that, then we can think about having papers which are actually long enough that you understand what's going on. I get very frustrated when, after I've read the paper 3 times, I still don't know the answer to a number of questions. So thanks, Margot. I think that's a great idea.
One more question.
Thanks for the great talk, Bonnie. This is Anna Rogers.
Oh,
And,
hi, Anna. Okay.
And my question is about this idea for the positive citations as the mark of quality. I've seen this idea discussed a lot on Twitter, especially the machine learning community loves this. And I've been wondering if we would solve one problem, but get another one, because positive citations are a mark of quality, but they are also very proportionally related to whether the paper has a famous PI on it and whether it comes from an industry lab that has lots of resources to do PR on it. I wish it was just directly a proxy for quality, but it is not.
Yeah, Anna, you're probably right, but I don't have enough data on citations and whether they really are correlated with having a famous first author or a famous last author. I mean, I have seen a number of articles where you have it coming out of a woman's lab are not as valued as papers coming out of a man's lab. So I think there probably is more study that needs to be done about positive citations. But I was actually thinking that the issue was because people don't know that citations actually have a role and not just a listing. So that you bring up a paper as a citation because it's setting some kind of groundwork for what you're doing. You're either doing it to fill in a hole that you saw in this previous work, or you're doing something where you've got more coverage than previous work, but you're citing a paper for a reason, that you acknowledge its contributions, but note where there might be a failing. So I think that both points are valid. Your point that positive citations may not necessarily identify all of the relevant papers, and my point about people actually having to understand how to cite papers with respect to what they're trying to claim about their own work. So thanks for bringing that up. I think it probably is very important.
Thank you.
Yes, we have a citation in the chat, but also if I may comment. So I think there's a way to combine Bonnie's proposal with Noah's proposal, and nobody will buy it, but the proposal would be just
Noah and I would buy it, I'm sure.
have the paper stay completely anonymous for the first 5 years. And then there's no influence of rich get richer, there's that effect doesn't work, right? Because the paper is anonymous.
Yeah, I don't think my students will buy it. They need to get it, they need to get, and I hate to be, so utilitarian and cynical about it, but the papers serve this extra role, and we can't ignore that they build careers.
Okay, how about 1 year?
1 year, no, 6 months. I mean, anonymity can be a powerful equalizer. It's probably an ingredient we could use.
Right, and Anna, let me add something, because if we take the role of the conferences and workshops, which to me is the most delightful role of the conferences and workshop, where I never would have met you or Anna number 2, is that we really do need these venues in which new researchers in the field can talk among themselves and with established researchers. So nothing is ever going to be completely anonymous when you need these opportunities for presenting your work. So I think the work is never going to stay anonymous for a year or 5 years, but that you need to possibly separate out a presentation of the work, which nobody publishes their whole theses. It used to be the case that we published entire theses as books. Well, we don't do that anymore. It doesn't make the publishers any kind of money, and we don't. For some people, they never do write at length. And I think that's where there's a gap. And we could have the longer papers be the bases for promotion and review, and therefore not make it difficult for new researchers, because also they do gain something from writing a longer paper. So I think we need the conferences for learning about for meeting people, learning about their work, but that the evaluation and the assessment and the promotions comes from people being able to take a much more holistic view of their work and present it in a long form, which can be evaluated.
So there's a couple of questions online. Dennis, would you like to ask your question using voice?
So I'm
Okay.
reading Dennis's comment that as the number of published papers grows, it's harder to get your paper noticed without a network, even if it is high quality. So I don't know. I think, Dennis, I would say that it depends on how many different strands there are in a field. So biomedicine is growing. The number of published papers in biomedicine is growing even faster than in our field. But you know that if you're looking at a particular molecule, you're looking at a particular gene, you follow everything that's written on that topic. So I think if we don't feel that we have to know everything, and right now, of course, we don't know everything because the same things get discovered across multiple parts of the field, given different names, and we never discover it until we talk to somebody. So I think you can probably do without a network, but we have to be much clearer about how we find the relevant material which is relevant to the research that we're carrying on ourselves. Sabine, I wonder if a paper isn't prerequisite for attending a conference, what other metric will decide who gets to go to a conference? Okay, so I'm glad Sabine is so positive that she believes that we're going to be traveling again, which is great. And you know, the ideal answer is that everybody goes to the conference, which is what has happened with these virtual conferences and why we have 4,000 people attending a virtual conference that when it was physical only had 1,200 people attending. So I think we have moved into having these enormous large conferences, and we've gotten away from having smaller, more local conferences, which are much easier for people to attend. So I think there are a lot of things that we can think about if we put them all on the table at once and not think that everything has to be locked up in a single acorn and never separated again. I know, Uli, that it has to do with getting funding as a student to attend a conference. So that's why I'm saying that if we have more local conferences, it doesn't cost as much to attend them. So I think there'll be a lot more people from the UK attending a conference in Dublin than attending a conference in Darwin, Northern Territories.
Thank you. So we have one more in-person question, and that's probably what we have time for before the next session. So
It's a short question. It's Margot again.
Hi, Margot.
So I like the idea of having more local conferences, but then again, one of the nice things about having these international conferences is that you meet people from, for example, the Northern Territory,
Yes.
even though you can't necessarily travel there. But then there is also the aspect that has been also growing concern is if 3,000-4,000 NLP people are traveling around the world 4 times a year, that is also a huge ecological impact, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So we can't afford it. We can't afford it as a world to have that many people traveling that far, that many times. And I think right before the pandemic, we had reached a point where we have like this traveling circus of many places that around the world where you might want to go and meet people. So I think a lot of the meeting, or at least some of the meeting that we get in this virtual world like the 100 women who were listening in on a meeting yesterday on women and leadership in NLP. Gosh, I got to meet a lot of people. Of course, we have to have more cameras on. Right now, we have a lot of people who are there in print only. So I'm glad to see some people have their cameras on. And if we can have more of like the birds of a feather sessions, I think they're really positive in terms of meeting people. So it doesn't answer all of Sabine's question. It doesn't completely address the point you're making, but I think being able to meet other people in informal settings, and one day we'll have informal settings that actually work. It's very good. So Anna, thank you for introducing me. Thank you for running the session. And I look forward to hearing everybody else's papers. And thank you, audience. You were wonderful.
Thank you, Bonnie. We wish we had you here, but thank you for agreeing to give the talk anyway. All right, so the next session is going to be in GatherTown, which we're going to project here, I guess. Awesome.
I think you want to hope that we're in the right GatherTown.